I'm proud to tell you that we started the webinar with one of our editor, Nicholas is serving as editor of the Global Journal of Clinical Engineering, and told us why and how to write paper, understanding the readers in mind. And next, we're going to Professor and Head of Service of Clinical Engineering, Dan Clark, at Nottingham University in UK, where he's also co-director of the Center for Healthcare Technology and director of CHITA. It is my honor to request Dan to take us to what are the lessons that one can learn from publishing our work. And before Dan start, I just want to remind you that one of his good publication was published at the Global Clinical Engineering Journal about non-contact infrared temperature monitoring evaluations. And that was just in time for understanding how can we monitor compliance or conditions of individuals during this pandemic season. With that introduction, Dan, please go ahead.
Well, thank you very much, Yadin, for that introduction, and good morning or good afternoon or good evening to all of you, wherever you are. And thank you to IFMBE CED for this opportunity to talk about how to get more publications out of clinical engineers. We know, of course, that clinical engineers as a profession have historically had a very poor track record of publications and broadcasting the work that we do. So it's great to have this opportunity now that we're giving some thought to how we might improve this. But as scientists and as engineers, we know that we can only really solve a problem if we can better understand that problem. So perhaps the first and most important question we ought to focus on is not so much how we encourage more clinical engineers to publish, but rather why clinical engineers are not publishing in great numbers right now. Next slide, please, Callie. So why is it then that as a profession we don't tend to publish very much? I mean, it's not like we don't have the opportunity. We have plenty of opportunities. We're working really at the forefront of science and technology. We're working in a field of healthcare which is clearly bringing benefits to patients and is of interest to the wider population. We do great research, great developments. We've got a lot of innovations going on, and people want to know about this. And it's not like there isn't the opportunity. There are plenty of journals and out there for us to aim at, from the very highbrow like Nature and Science to the more applications, technology-based journals. And I might point to one right in the center of the screen at the moment, which Yadin has already mentioned, the Global Clinical Engineering Journal. And then we go right through to the more, if you like, journalistic approach in some of the news, scientific news magazines. So there's lots of opportunities. So what's stopping us? What's stopping clinical engineers? What are the barriers? Well, let's face it, Nicholas has already said this, but let's face it, it can be quite tricky, quite hard work to publish our research findings. It takes time, it takes effort. When we're busy, and clinical engineers do tend to be rather busy, providing operational services to support our hospitals and to look after patients, when you're busy, why should you take the time and effort to write up your work, your findings, in the form of a paper for publication? I thought I'd take some lessons from some colleagues in other disciplines who are more successful in publications. And the first of those I looked at was the academics. Now, academics publish a lot. Hardly surprising. Academics are measured on how much they publish. Their track record is important to them. The more they publish means the greater their prestige. It leads to better opportunities to get grant funding. It means attracting more funding to get their research done. It helps them with their career progression. So it's not surprising that academics are motivated to publish. Another group of people who publish perhaps better, more prolifically than clinical engineers is our industrial colleagues. Now, for them, it's the case that good publication will promote the product, promote their new developments for their company. Good publications give credibility to that company, credibility to the product, and ultimately can lead to increased sales. Again, it's easy to understand why industrial colleagues tend to publish better than clinical engineers. So what motivates clinical engineers to publish? Publications are not generally part of our key performance criteria. Nobody measures us on our publications record. Generally, we're not using publications to seek further funding for our work, and we're certainly not promoting new products. So why should we go to the trouble of finding the time and the effort? What's our motivation? So motivation, I think, is one of the key barriers for clinical engineers and publications. Another key barrier is time. Again, we've said this, clinical engineers are busy people. We've got a lot of operational pressures. Finding the time to publish can be challenging. Chances are we solve one problem in our hospitals, and rather than stop and write it up, we just move on to the next, because there's always more problems, always more challenges facing in our everyday working life. So writing for publications can be hard, can be tricky, can certainly be time consuming, and that's another barrier for us not to publish. And finally, and you might be surprised to hear me say this, finally, I think a barrier for publications for clinical engineer is one of confidence. It's not that hard when we come to it to write up a publication, and we're clever people by and large, we ought to be able to cope with it. But we tend not to, because we tend to feel perhaps this isn't a core part of what we should do, and it's not what we do every day of the week, and we perhaps feel intimidated by our academic colleagues who do publish all of it. We lack, if you like, the confidence to show off the good work that we do. And perhaps we worry also that we might come in for criticism, publish what we've done or how we've done. So these are the three barriers that I think are the most important ones for us to face, and how can we face up to those barriers and what can we do about them? Next slide, please, Kelly Roy. So here in Nottingham, in the United Kingdom, we've tried to address those three barriers with the creation of the Centre for Healthcare Technologies. The centre is a joint venture between our hospitals and our local universities, and we collaborate very closely with our industrial partners. The key success of the centre is that it brings together healthcare with academia and industry, all working together towards a common goal. Now, the centre wasn't created just to generate new publications, of course. It was created to maximise the potential of research in new and emerging technologies for healthcare, and to accelerate the adoption of innovations for the benefit of our patients. But as it happens, as some happy bonus, it also increases the amount of opportunities we have for publications for our clinical engineers. So if we look at that first barrier of motivations, well, we know that the academics and the students working at the universities are very motivated to publish. So let's encourage them to do so, but to do so with us. They've got the time, they've got the skills, they've got the expertise, and we've got the problems, we've got the challenges in our hospitals. So let's encourage our academics to come in and work with us on our problems, on our challenges, on our projects. And more importantly, at this stage, let's encourage them to help us write it up. They can write up the publications, they might want to be the first author, and that's fine with us. We can be the second or third author. We generally don't need to be the first author. Better to get the publication out there. So that gets us across one of the barriers of motivation. The second barrier then is time. Well, the academics again have more time than we do in this area of publications. Let's let them use that time and do the lion's share of the publication. Of course, we as clinical engineers who've been working on the problem and working on the projects and doing the research in the hospitals, we need to contribute to that publication. But it's much easier, much less time consuming if you're contributing to an academic colleague's work than it is to start from scratch yourself. So when you get used to that, we can get confidence in that, we can get the academics to take a lot of the hard work out of it for us. So that gets us over the second barrier of time. And then finally, this barrier of confidence. We get this approach of collaborating with academics gets us over that barrier too, partly because the academics share the responsibility of getting the publication done, but actually partly because once you start doing something, once you start practicing, in the publications field, it becomes easier, it becomes more natural. Once you've got 1 or 2 publications under your belt in collaboration with an academic, then it becomes just more natural and easier for you to write your own publications. So here in Nottingham in the UK, we found that one of the best ways to increase our publication output is to do so in partnership with our academic and sometimes also our industrial colleagues. And this is very much a symbiotic relationship. We get something out of it, but so do they. In the hospital, we know, you all know, there are lots and lots of healthcare challenges, all looking for a solution, all looking for an engineering, technological solution. And over in the university, there are lots of bright people, all with solutions, clever ideas, just looking for challenges. And we can give them the opportunity. We can give them those real world challenges. In the UK, academics often talk about having impact of their research. What's the real value of the research that they do? Well, what could be more valuable than research that improves patient lives and in some cases saves patient lives? And we can give them the opportunity of doing that. We can give them the opportunity of demonstrating the real value of their research. And what we get out of it is we get out an increased academic publication record of our own, which is obviously important and what we're talking about this afternoon. But of course, we also get much more. We get to see state-of-the-art science and engineering being used for the benefit of patients, which is, after all, what we're all about. Next slide, please, Kelly-Ray. So I'd just like to finish with a word of thanks to my colleagues in Nottingham. The Centre for Healthcare Technology is run by 3 directors. We have 1 director who takes the lead for all the primary research, that's Professor Steve Morgan. We have 1 director who looks after the adoption and translation of technologies into healthcare, and that's myself. And then we have a 3rd director who looks after and takes the lead for training the new generations of clinical and biomedical engineers, and that's Professor Donal McNally. And of course, we're wonderfully supported by 3 program and business managers who actually do all the real work and make everything happen. Next slide, please, Kelly-Ray. And that's me for now. So thank you very much for listening, and I'll be around on this call later if there are any questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Clark.